ID, which will come handy if we want to isolate specific areas or quick select features, but we will dive into that later. We don't need to use this at the moment. It's good to know that it's there. So also, one other thing that I want to point out is that ZBrush does a pretty good job at making the topology all quads, and the reason why you want to have quads as opposite of triangles, it's because when we are going to subdivide our mesh, if you have triangles, triangles tend to create pinches in the mesh, and those pinches are very hard to clean up. So that's why you want to have as much quads as possible, because when you subdivide your mesh, the quads will create a very smooth and clean surface. So let's go back. Actually, since we modified the head a little bit, let's just make sure that we resave this. Okay. Now, the next step here, this is only a preview, okay? It's not actually creating this geometry yet. So if we want to create this geometry, we're gonna click on Make Adaptive Skin. Let's create it. Now, nothing has changed here, but if we go into the Subtools panel, now we have our mesh. And if I click the A button, I can still switch between the two, but now ZBrush has created our mesh. Now this is a fully sculptable mesh. I can go to any brush, increase my size, and I can start sculpting on this, as you can see. So what we want to do now, obviously, this level of detail is way too low for us to be able to do anything with it, but it is important to never start with a particularly high poly count, because we need to go progressively from overall shapes and proportion and then starting to add detail later on. You'd never start from the fine details because you want to be sure that you have first the overall proportions right before diving into the details. Now, what I'd like to do when I work, I'd like to keep kind of like duplicates of my stages, just in case I want to go back. Obviously, ZBrush has a very good history that you can scrub back and forward, but it's always a good idea to keep a duplicated version of what we are doing. So this subtool panel here, now it's empty, it only has my model. What we're gonna do is click on duplicate, and so now you can see we have one new polygon mesh, and this is what we're gonna work on. So I'm gonna click here, and as you can see, if I'm going to, it looks that nothing happened here, but because the two meshes are identical and overlapping. However, if I, for example, go here and start moving this around, you can see that below, like the darker version is this one. So let's undo that. I'm gonna uncheck, if you click on the icons, will not display this model. So now if I move, as you can see, it's not displayed. You can see I can activate it. It's there, but it's just hidden. And so undo, well, here. So let's start by creating a Dynamesh. Now, what is Dynamesh? So if I go here on geometry, there is this tab called Dynamesh. Dynamesh is, like the name suggests, a dynamically generated mesh. And what I mean by that, I will show you in a second. So if I click on Dynamesh right now, let's see what happens. First of all, it says that the mesh has multiple subdivision level. Let's click no. I don't want to keep them. Now, you might have noticed something have changed here a little bit. The mesh is not, it looks a little bit different, does it? And that's because what actually happened, if I go here and show the polygons, this what happened. Let me just undo to show you what happened here. So this is the initial polygon mesh, and if I do Dynamesh again, no, this is how it becomes. So what Dynamesh does, basically, it generates automatically a finer mesh that traces, that resembles your previous mesh. And what that allows you to do is to have a uniform distribution of polygon across your mesh. Why do I want a uniform distribution? Well, by clicking Ctrl D, if I start subdividing this guy, you can see it becomes smooth, right? And you can see the subdivision level going up. I can scrub this and go back to my lowest subdivision, go higher, or I can press Shift D, that does the same thing, or D to go up. But what happens is that, if you notice, if I go to the lowest subdivision polygons, the size of this square here, it's much smaller than the size of this square. So what happens is that when I subdivide my mesh, and then I want to sculpt some fine detail, let me zoom here. Let's say I'm start to sculpting something. You can see that I have a pretty decent detail here, but if I do the same thing here, you see how the detail is much lower, okay, even if the brush size is exactly the same. And that's because the density of the polygons here is much higher than the density of the polygons here, and you don't want that. So let's undo this. So let's go back to level 2 and delete the previous subdivision for now. So when I click on Dynamesh, let's click no. When I click on Dynamesh, as you can see, that everywhere the size of the square, it's pretty much the same. It's you see, everywhere it's the same size. So if I subdivide this and I sculpt here, I get nice detail as well. And if I sculpt here and I get the same nice detail. This is a very important step. Now, why, you're probably wondering, why does this mesh look like this? It's not very smooth, right? Well, the reason is because Dynamesh, when it's generated, it will try to adapt as best as possible to the mesh where it's generated from. So if I go back here, you can see the original mesh was this, right? So what you want to do before clicking on Dynamesh is to add some details, some smooth details like this, and then you click on Dynamesh. And again, click no, because we are not, at the moment, we are not interested in the subdivision at this stage. So now we have our equal size mesh, and our model is fairly smooth. Obviously we will increase the detail of this mesh later on, but for now this is a good size. It's a good detail from start, making like proportions and and overall shapes. Now let me activate symmetry again, like this. So now, as you can see, if I start doing stuff, it will affect both sides. Now, for this first video, this was a very basics overview on how to get to a point where we have one sculptable base mesh. Obviously it looks very odd, especially here, but from the next video we will start sculpting and refining this mesh to make it look a little bit more like our Mr. Incredible characters. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.